Welcome back, guys. In this video, we're going to put it all together, the knowledge about JSX, the concept of React functions, and we're also going to add Bootstrap to style our little application as we go along. So let's get started. First, I want to go ahead and make this root component be where all of the layouts live. It's going to be a simple nav bar in our case. So we're going to have to go ahead and add Bootstrap first. To add Bootstrap, we can just do an npm install and save it. We're going to go ahead and do that. Bootstrap-save. And that should add it to our package.json inside our dependencies list. So let's go ahead and run it. Great, there we go. The next thing we have to do is import the Bootstrap CSS. I think that's what it's called. Let me look at the documentation. Adding Bootstrap to React. This is essentially what programming is. Just so you know, there we go. It's kind of close. And then as the message noted, I'm going to add my custom CSS styles after, just in case I have any. In this case, we don't want any. So if we go back to our application, it should look different now. Nice. Our styles are gone. It's basically only Bootstrap styles. So now let's go ahead and get started with changing up the code and whatnot. Let's go ahead and find a Bootstrap starter template. Really, we just want a nice nav bar where we can, this looks perfect. And then we'll put the timer where the album example is at. Nice. Okay. I'm happy with it. Let's go ahead and steal the header. Since it's also Bootstrap, it should just automatically work for our application. You do gotta keep in mind that for React, since we're not writing HTML, remember we're writing JSX, we want to make sure that we use the proper attribute name, which for JSX, instead of a class, it's class name. So now this should be working. And you see this is a little off in terms of alignment. A very good tool that I heavily rely on is Prettier. It just makes the code prettier. There we go. Okay, so now that Prettier is installed, we're gonna do Ctrl-Shift-P and we're gonna format our document. We're gonna do it this time, the first time, so that it asks us to choose Prettier. We choose Prettier, and now if I just save, it'll do it. Voila. Okay, good to go. So now let's go ahead and npm run start. Let's see what our app looks like now. It should be beautiful, and yeah, exactly. I don't want this anymore. I'm just gonna remove this SVG stuff. The button. go. That's the header we want. It's just going to be timer. There we go. We've got our header. But next, we want to go ahead and have the rest of the application. Since it's a very simple React application, we don't have to worry about routes. There's many paths you can go if you have a React application that is big enough that you need to have multiple routes. You can use the React router, or you could just go full-blown Next.js. In our case, we don't have either. Maybe later on we will be adding some. But for now, we'll just have our little timer there. This is the header, and then we're gonna have the main timer here. Let's go ahead and grab a Bootstrap Jumbotron and replace the contents of that with our timer. This looks like a Jumbotron to me. I love that word. I have no idea where they got that from, but out of nowhere in the world of web development, suddenly there was the concept of a Jumbotron, and everybody knew what it was from Bootstrap, but never heard that word before. If you know where that is coming from, please tell me in a comment or an email or Venmo, however you want to reach me. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Perfect. This is a custom Jumbotron. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, instead of this, we're gonna have our timer, a little Pomodoro timer. This is going to say stopped. Let's go ahead and center it. Nice. This is completely off. Probably because it's a P. Let's go ahead and make it a span. See if my theory holds. Does not hold. Maybe put everything in a div. Nope. This is why I don't want to do any styling, and why I'm using Bootstrap. So we're just gonna have the button there. It's gonna start it and it's gonna stop it. Requirements change. Okay. Go ahead and add a little message in the bottom, made by Mr. Funk. Go ahead and center this as well. So all of these classes, you really shouldn't know them. I've just done so much web development that I know some of them. You can reference them online, but basically we've got a pretty good skeleton of what our app will look like and what we need to implement next. We have basically broken it up into three main components, which is the navbar header, the actual timer, and then some sort of a footer. And let's go ahead and leverage the best part of React, which is to actually encapsulate each of these logical sections into physical files. Okay, so now what we're basically going to have is the main application. This is one component. This is app. And then app will be a composition of the header component, the timer component, and the footer component. Footer, timer, and the header. So this is what the main philosophy behind React, that you can use composition to extend your web applications. In the future, you'll see that if we want to reuse the timer anywhere else, we can just pull it out if it's properly refactored into an independent component. Let's go ahead and break them out into files as the last thing we're going to do in this step. So we are going to create a header, .csx, and that is going to contain all of this. It should just be a function that returns JSX. You see prettifier make everything pretty, and it should export default header. Whoops. Let's see if this still builds. Yep, we're good. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the timer. 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 Now you'll notice that when I export this, it really doesn't matter what I name it. I'll show you. Because when you import it, it's basically going to take the name from the file name. So it should still work. Even if I go ahead and rename this something else. See, timer is called header. And here timer is because it's just saying the default export from the file called timer. I'm gonna call timer, but I could just call this Jose, and it would work. Because it's just grabbing the default import. If you don't grab the default import, you can specify exactly what of the exported items you want to reference. But in this case, we're going to keep the timer name because it is more reasonable. And we're going to also call this timer so we don't confuse future developers. And then the last part that we're going to break out is the footer. I'm going to call this a footer, and I'm going to call this a footer. And this will be footer. You could also go into the practice of naming each of these the same when you're, because it doesn't matter and you're using default exports. I find it useful to be as clear even in all my breadcrumbs. And I call it a breadcrumb because sometimes you're so deep into a logical function that you have similar components, you may not remember exactly where you are. Usually that's a hint you should take a break, but it happens. And if you see header and you were doing work for the timer, you'll be like, oh no, copy paste this out. So something like that can be helpful sometimes. And that's it. We've basically put it all together. The concept of JSX, the React components, we've composed them into a decent looking application using Bootstrap. And after this, we're going to go ahead and talk about conventions for putting the components in one place. Sorry, that's my dog. And we're going to start implementing the meat of the timer. So stick around.